Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixgun. If you are tuning into our YouTube channel, then you are a connoisseur of the good old Western tales, aren't you? We are glad to have you with us. Here at Saddle and Sixgun, we're fixin' to spin you a yarn that'll have you hooked tighter than a tick on a hound dog. This ain't your average dime novel, mind you. This is a story about grit, determination, and the kind of justice that tastes sweeter than a sip of whiskey after a long day in the saddle. We're talkin' about the human spirit, buckin' against the odds, and finned-in redemption in the most unexpected places. So, settle in, pour yourself a drink, and get ready to ride along with us on this Wild West adventure. Before we get started, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, be sure to give that like button a good old tap and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun for more stories that'll keep you coming back for more, partner. Now, picture this, a dusty town, swelterin' under the prairie sun. A corrupt judge, fat with power and fueled by cheap liquor, runnin' a show that'd make even the devil blush. And in the middle of it all, a young woman, her spirit near broken, facin' a fate worse than death. This woman is Eliza. She is a true soul. Any wife for free. The corrupt judge laughed like a hyena as the drunken crowd roared its approval. This was Judge Horus Pike's monthly spectacle, and the townsfolk ate it up like vultures on a fresh carcass. But then, a giant of a cowboy, weathered and worn but with a heart as big as the Montana sky, stepped forward. His hand rose, steady as a stone, and pointed directly at the trembling black girl in chains. To the jeering spectators, she was nothing, a broken thing, meant only for backbreakin labor, too weak and worthless for any decent man to claim. They assumed her story was already written. A lifetime of silent suffering under whoever might take pity on her wretched state. But this quiet mountain of a man, this cowboy named Gideon Rain, saw something else entirely. Something that would either damn them both or set them free. Gideon Rain's choice triggered a cruel wager that would test not just her survival, but everything the town believed about power, worth, and justice. If she could prove herself worthy as his wife for one full year, she would earn her freedom. But failure meant chains twice as heavy as before. Was this the cruelest trick ever played, or their only chance at redemption? So, what do you think happened next? Before we continue, tell me if you think Eliza is worth it. The shackles bit into Eliza's wrists as she stumbled through the dusty main street. Townspeople gathered on wooden sidewalks, their faces twisted with cruel amusement. Children threw pebbles. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men spat tobacco juice dangerously close to her bare feet. Judge Horus Pike's monthly spectacle drew crowds from 3 counties. The marriage market, he called it, a chance for desperate men to claim unclaimed women and settle their debts through the law. Pike enjoyed the power, the entertainment, the way people hung on his every word. Eliza had learned to keep her eyes down, to shuffle her feet, to let her shoulders slump in defeat. It kept her alive. It kept her from the worst punishments reserved for those who showed too much spirit. But behind her lowered lashes, her mind raced with calculations, legal precedents, escape routes, ways to survive another day. The courthouse steps groaned under the weight of spectators. Pike sat behind a makeshift bench, his black robe stained with whiskey and sweat. He banged a wooden gavel against an overturned crate. The crowd quieted. Martha Keene watched from the back corner, her widow's dress pressed neat despite the dust. She clutched her late husband's law books to her chest. The same books she read by candlelight when sleep wouldn't come. The same books that taught her to recognize injustice, even when she felt powerless to stop it. Pike's voice boomed across the square. He announced the terms, the available women, the eager men who stepped forward with their coins and promises. One by one, matches were made, debts settled, lives traded like livestock at auction. Eliza remained unchosen, always unchosen. Pike saved her for last, like a punchline to his favorite joke. The crowd anticipated it. The laughter that would follow. The humiliation that seasoned their entertainment. Heavy boots echoed on the courthouse steps. The crowd parted. A man emerged from the shadows between buildings. Tall as a door frame. Shoulders broad enough to block sunlight. His clothes spoke of hard work and honest sweat. His eyes spoke of something deeper, something that made the laughing faces turn away. Gideon Rain had ridden into town for supplies, nothing more. But the sight of Pike's circus twisted his stomach. He'd seen enough cruelty, lived through enough injustice. His own family had been destroyed by men like Pike. Men who treated human lives as property to be bought and sold. Pike noticed the newcomer, smelled opportunity, fresh blood for his show. He gestured grandly toward the remaining women, his voice dripping with false charity. The crowd held its breath. New sport, a stranger to humiliate. Pike's favorite game was watchin' decent men squirm under social pressure, watchin' them choose the safe option, the expected option, anything but the broken girl in chains. Gideon's gaze swept across the available women. It settled on Eliza. She looked up for just a moment. Their eyes met. In that instant, something passed between them. Recognition of shared pain, shared defiance against a world that delighted in breaking spirits. Pike's laughter echoed off the courthouse walls. He pointed at Eliza with theatrical flair, made his offer, turned it into a joke for the crowd's amusement, expected the stranger to join the laughter, to choose someone else, anyone else. The silence stretched like a held breath. Gideon's hand rose, steady, unwavering. His finger pointed directly at Eliza. The laughter died. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Pike's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. He had to honor the choice. His own rules demanded it, but he could make the terms impossible. Could ensure the stranger regretted his decision. Pike announced the conditions. A year-long trial. Eliza must prove herself worthy as a frontier wife. Must demonstrate value beyond her current broken state. Success would bring freedom papers, citizenship, a real life. Failure would mean return to bondage with doubled punishment. The crowd murmured approval. This would be better than a simple auction, a year-long entertainment. A chance to watch two outsiders destroy each other through impossible expectations. Eliza felt the world tilt. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one chose her ever. Was this kindness or another form of cruelty? Did it matter? The alternative was Pike's work camps, places where women disappeared and never returned. Martha watched the stranger's face, saw something in his expression that reminded her of her late husband, the same quiet determination, the same willingness to stand against popular opinion. She pressed the law books tighter to her chest and made a silent decision. Pike dismissed the crowd, but his mind was already working. This stranger had disrupted his careful order, made his system look foolish. That couldn't stand. He would ensure their failure, document every mistake, use their inevitable collapse to strengthen his authority over other troublemakers. As the spectators dispersed, Gideon approached Eliza. He unlocked her shackles with keys provided by Pike. His touch was gentle, professional, nothing more. But it was the first kind touch she'd felt in years. Eliza rubbed her freed wrists, felt blood return to her hands, looked up at the man who just changed her entire world. He was studying her with the same careful attention he might give a wounded animal, not with pity, with assessment, as if measuring her capacity to heal. The crowd scattered to spread news of Pike's latest show. Bets were already being placed on how long the unlikely pair would last. Most gave them a month. The generous ones wagered 3. Martha lingered until the square emptied. Then she approached slowly. Offered her wagon for transport to Gideon's farm. Spoke few words, but her meaning was clear. Not everyone in town supported Pike's entertainment. Some still remembered what decency looked like. The sun dipped toward the horizon as they prepared to leave. Eliza climbed into the wagon bed. Gideon took the driver's seat. Martha rode beside him, her law books creating a barrier between her and the judgment of any observers. As they rolled away from the courthouse, none of them fully understood what they'd set in motion. Pike's system depended on predictable outcomes, on maintaining the natural order of things. But natural order was about to meet something it hadn't planned for. Something that would test not just Eliza's survival, but the very foundations of Pike's corrupt kingdom. The real trial was just beginning. Now, before we continue with the story, let's take a moment to remind you to like this video and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun. We appreciate your support and hope you're enjoying the story so far. The farmhouse sat 20 m from town, surrounded by struggling crops and weathered fences. Gideon led Eliza through rooms that spoke of solitary living, simple furniture, practical arrangements, no woman's touch anywhere. He showed her to a small room with a narrow bed, clean sheets, a wash basin, more comfort than she'd known in years. He left her there without ceremony, no expectations voiced, no demands made, just space to breathe. Eliza sat on the bed's edge, felt the softness beneath her, tried to understand what had happened, why this stranger had chosen her, what he wanted in return. Men always wanted something. Days passed in cautious routine. Gideon worked the fields before dawn. Eliza managed the house, cooked simple meals, mended what needed fixing. They spoke little, watched each other from safe distances, both waiting for the other's true nature to reveal itself. Martha visited weekly with supplies and news from town. Pike had been asking questions, making inquiries about their progress, already documenting small failures, a burned meal, a torn shirt, evidence for his future case. The accident started small, a broken fence post that let cattle wander, spoiled grain in the storage bin, a well bucket that suddenly developed holes. Gideon repaired each problem without complaint, but his eyes grew watchful, suspicious. Eliza noticed patterns the others missed, the timing of each mishap, the precision of each disruption. Someone was orchestrating their failures. Someone who understood farming well enough to create believable accidents. She wanted to speak up, to share her observations, but revealing such analytical thinking would expose abilities she'd kept hidden for years. Abilities that had earned her severe punishment before. Better to stay silent, to appear simple and grateful. Pike visited monthly to inspect their progress. He arrived with ledgers and official papers, made notes about cleanliness, obedience, domestic skills. Each visit left him more frustrated. They were succeeding despite his expectations. The stranger treated the girl with inexplicable respect. No beatings, no public humiliation, no efforts to break her spirit. It defied everything Pike understood about natural order, about the proper relationship between masters and property. Gideon's past remained largely unspoken, but Eliza caught glimpses. A woman's shawl in a trunk, children's toys carved from wood, a grave marker behind the house with 2 names and recent dates. Loss had shaped this man, made him understand suffering in ways the town couldn't. Summer brought worse sabotage, poisoned livestock, burned hay stores, damaged equipment that threatened their harvest. Gideon's jaw tightened with each incident. His sleep grew restless. His patience wore thin with neighbors who suddenly couldn't spare time for mutual aid. Martha's visits became longer, more pointed. She brought news of other families facing similar mysterious accidents. All people who'd shown sympathy for Gideon's choice. Pike's influence was spreading like infection through the community. Eliza began taking risks, small ones. She reorganized Gideon's account books when he wasn't looking, corrected mathematical errors, suggested better crop rotations through seemingly innocent questions. Each success made her bolder, more careless about hiding her capabilities. The crisis came in September. Fire in the main barn during harvest season. Flames that threatened everything they'd built together, everything that stood between Eliza and return to bondage. Gideon rushed to save the livestock. A beam collapsed across his back, pinned him beneath burning timber. Eliza heard his cry from the house, saw the orange glow against the night sky, made a choice that would change everything. She ran toward the flames instead of away from them, organized the arriving neighbors with clear authority, directed water lines with mathematical precision, calculated wind patterns and fire behavior with startling accuracy. When Gideon regained consciousness, he found his barn saved, his livestock protected, his crops intact. Eliza knelt beside him, checking his injuries with practiced medical knowledge. Her hands moved with trained confidence. Her voice carried educated authority. The facade was broken. The simple, grateful girl was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone with intelligence that blazed brighter than the flames she'd conquered. She told him everything: her real name, Elizabeth Thornwell, her father's law practice in Boston, her mother's teaching credentials, the Confederate raid that destroyed her family, the years of hiding her education to survive. She spoke of deliberate ignorance as protection, of calculated helplessness as camouflage, of choosing to appear broken rather than invite the attention that intelligence brought from cruel masters. Gideon listened without judgment. His own mother had been educated, had died protecting their family's books from raiders who saw learning as dangerous, who believed knowledge belonged only to certain people, who punished anyone who challenged that belief. He understood now why she'd caught mathematical errors without speaking, why she'd suggested improvements through innocent questions, why her cooking had improved so dramatically once she stopped pretending not to read recipes. The neighbors who'd helped fight the fire carried stories back to town, stories of the girl who'd taken charge, who'd saved the harvest through quick thinking and clear leadership, who demonstrated abilities that didn't match Pike's official documentation. Martha heard the whispers first, saw how they frightened Pike, how they threatened his careful narrative of the girl's inevitable failure. She began watching more carefully, listening more closely, remembering details that suddenly made sense. Pike's visits became more frequent, more invasive. He questioned neighbors about specific incidents, demanded detailed reports about domestic arrangements, searched for evidence of failure with increasing desperation. The townspeople sensed change in the air. Some welcomed it, others feared it. All understood that something fundamental was shifting, that the stranger's choice had set forces in motion beyond anyone's control. Elizabeth stood in her kitchen, no longer hiding her capabilities. She planned their next moves with strategic thinking, organized their defenses with tactical precision, prepared for battles she finally felt equipped to fight. The masquerade was over. The real Elizabeth Thornwell had emerged, and she was far more dangerous to Pike's system than anyone had imagined. Elizabeth's transformation sent ripples through the community like stones dropped in still water. Word spread quickly in a town where entertainment was scarce. The simpleton girl had revealed herself as something else entirely, something that challenged everyone's assumptions about intelligence, worth, and natural order. Pike felt the ground shifting beneath his carefully constructed authority. His monthly inspections revealed a thriving household, clean accounts, productive fields, a woman who spoke with confidence and handled complex tasks with ease. Nothing matched his predictions of inevitable failure. He increased his sabotage efforts. Crops disappeared overnight. Tools vanished from locked sheds. Water sources became mysteriously contaminated. Each incident was subtle enough to appear accidental. Each one designed to create cumulative pressure that would break their resolve. Elizabeth documented everything. She kept detailed records in precise handwriting that would have impressed her father's law clerks. Dates, times, witnesses, patterns. She was building a case without fully understanding where it would lead. Gideon watched his partner work with growing amazement. She managed their finances better than any banker, planned crop rotations with scientific precision, negotiated with suppliers using legal language that left them speechless. She was everything Pike claimed was impossible. Their relationship evolved beyond the crude transaction Pike had envisioned. Mutual respect deepened into genuine affection. Shared goals created unbreakable bonds. They became true partners in ways that transcended legal documents or social expectations. Martha's courage grew alongside Elizabeth's confidence. She began trading with them openly despite community pressure, defended them in conversations that turned hostile, stood up to neighbors who echoed Pike's opinions without question. The widow carried secrets that weighed heavier each day. Her late husband had worked as Pike's bookkeeper before his conscience forced him to quit. He documented irregularities, financial discrepancies, questionable transactions that painted Pike's operations in a disturbing light. She'd kept his records hidden for years, too frightened to act, too isolated to know who might help. But watching Elizabeth's courage stirred something long dormant in her spirit, something that demanded action over silence. Pike's desperation manifested in bolder moves. He pressured businesses to refuse trade with the couple, spread rumors about Elizabeth bewitching Gideon through unnatural means, suggested that their success proved some form of corruption or deception. Some townspeople bought his narrative. Others began questioning his authority. The community split along lines that revealed deeper divisions about justice, fairness, and human dignity. Pike's entertainment was becoming a catalyst for uncomfortable truths. Elizabeth's reputation as a healer spread when she successfully treated a neighbor's infected wound. Her medical knowledge, learned from her mother, saved a child from fever. Word traveled. People began seeking her help despite Pike's warnings. Each success undermined Pike's characterization of her as worthless property. Each demonstration of her capabilities challenged the assumptions his system required. She was becoming a living contradiction to everything he preached about natural hierarchy. Gideon's farm prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Their harvest yielded twice the normal crop. Their livestock remained healthy despite the region's widespread disease. Their accounts showed profits that made neighboring farmers jealous. The success attracted attention from territorial authorities, officials who governed from distant capitals, men who judged performance by results rather than racial prejudices or social expectations. Pike realized his local control might not extend to higher jurisdictions. Martha finally found her courage during a particularly vicious church sermon. Pike used his pulpit to condemn the unnatural union, to preach about proper order and divine will, to rally the faithful against dangerous examples of social disruption. She stood up in the middle of his speech, walked out in full view of the congregation, made her position clear without saying a word. Others followed, not many, but enough to demonstrate that Pike's authority wasn't absolute. The financial records Martha's husband had kept revealed a pattern of embezzlement spanning years. Town funds diverted to personal accounts. Legitimate land claims transferred to Pike's associates. Marriage auction proceeds disappearing into private coffers. Worse discoveries emerged as Martha studied the documentation. Women who'd failed Pike's trials hadn't been sent to work camps as publicly claimed. They'd been sold to human traffickers, transported beyond territorial boundaries, lost forever to criminal enterprises that treated human lives as commodities. Elizabeth's legal training helped her understand the document's implications. Pike wasn't just corrupt. He was running a criminal operation disguised as legitimate government, using his judicial authority to facilitate human trafficking on a massive scale. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Dozens of women had disappeared through Pike's system. Their families told they'd been relocated for honest work. The truth was far darker, far more profitable for Pike and his network of criminal associates. Elizabeth realized her own success threatened more than just Pike's ego. It risked exposing his entire operation, drawing attention from authorities who might investigate his methods, questioning the fate of other women who'd passed through his courthouse. She began reaching out carefully to other victims' families, gathering testimonies, building connections between suspicious disappearances and Pike's official records, constructing a case that would expose the full scope of his crimes. Pike sensed the danger closing around him. His visits became more aggressive, his threats more direct. He spoke openly about the consequences of failure, about the special punishments reserved for those who embarrassed his court. The year's end approached like an approaching storm. Pike announced plans for a special tribunal to evaluate Elizabeth's worthiness, a public hearing where community leaders would judge her performance, where failure would be documented for territorial authorities. Elizabeth understood the trap being set. Pike would manufacture evidence of her inadequacy, stack the tribunal with his supporters, use official proceedings to justify returning her to bondage, then quietly arrange her disappearance like so many others. But she also saw opportunity in Pike's desperation, a chance to turn his own system against him, to use legal procedures he couldn't control, to expose truths he'd kept hidden for years. The battle lines were drawn, Pike's corrupt authority against Elizabeth's brilliant mind, his criminal network against her growing evidence, his desperate fear against her determined courage. The final confrontation was coming. And this time, Elizabeth would be ready. Alright folks, we're heading into the final showdown, but before we do, let me remind you one last time to hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun. We don't want you missing out on any of our future tales from the Wild West. Pike scheduled the tribunal 3 weeks before Elizabeth's year ended. He announced it as a celebration of justice, a chance for the community to witness proper legal proceedings. In reality, he was setting the stage for his own vindication and her destruction. The courthouse filled to capacity on the appointed day. Townspeople arrived early to claim the best seats. Some came expecting entertainment, others sensed something deeper at stake. All understood they were witnessing more than a simple evaluation. Pike had spent weeks preparing his case. He'd gathered testimonies from neighbors about domestic failures, documented instances of disobedience, created a narrative of fundamental unworthiness that painted Elizabeth's year as an elaborate deception. Elizabeth entered the courthouse with Gideon and Martha flanking her. She carried herself differently than the broken girl who'd stood there a year before. Her spine was straight, her eyes clear, her presence commanded attention rather than pity. Pike opened proceedings with theatrical authority. He recited the original terms of the agreement, reminded the audience of his generous offer, painted himself as a benefactor whose kindness had been exploited by cunning manipulation. His witnesses testified to minor household incidents, a burned dinner early in the year, laundry that hadn't dried properly during a rainstorm, small imperfections that Pike claimed demonstrated fundamental inadequacy as a frontier wife. The crowd murmured approval. This was the narrative they understood, the outcome they expected. Pike's system was working as designed. Order was being restored. Elizabeth listened without reaction. She'd learned patience from years of survival, learned to let opponents reveal their weaknesses before striking back. Pike was building his case on foundations she could easily destroy. When Pike called for testimony about Elizabeth's character, Martha stood up. Her hands shook slightly as she approached the witness area, but her voice carried clearly across the packed courthouse. She spoke about Pike's financial records, about the discrepancies her husband had discovered, about money that disappeared from town accounts while Pike's personal wealth grew mysteriously. The crowd's murmur changed tone. This wasn't part of Pike's entertainment. This was dangerous territory that threatened powerful interests. Some people shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward with sudden attention. Martha continued with growing confidence. She presented documents that showed Pike's manipulation of land records, his unauthorized sale of public properties, his secret partnerships with criminal enterprises that operated beyond territorial boundaries. Pike's face reamed as he demanded order, claimed Martha's testimony was irrelevant to the proceedings, insisted the tribunal focus on Elizabeth's domestic performance rather than unrelated accusations. Elizabeth stood before Pike could silence Martha completely. She invoked her right to legal representation, cited territorial statutes that govern judicial proceedings, demanded proper documentation of all charges and evidence. Her legal knowledge stunned the courtroom into silence. This wasn't the submissive girl they remembered. This was someone who understood law better than most attorneys, someone who could challenge Pike's authority using his own system. She systematically dismantled his case, pointed out procedural violations in his evidence gathering, challenged the legal authority of his tribunal, demanded proof of his jurisdiction over territorial citizens. Pike tried to regain control by citing local customs and established precedents. Elizabeth countered with federal statutes and constitutional principles. She quoted legal precedents that superseded his local authority. The audience watched Pike's confident demeanor crumble. His theatrical authority dissolved under Elizabeth's precise legal arguments. He was being outmaneuvered by someone he dismissed as worthless property. Elizabeth then revealed the true scope of Pike's criminal operations. She presented evidence of human trafficking disguised as legal proceedings, documented the disappearance of women who'd failed Pike's trials, connected their vanishing to payment records from criminal buyers. The courthouse erupted in shocked voices. Families of missing women demanded answers. Community leaders questioned how such horrors had operated under their noses. Pike's entertainment had become a nightmare of exposed truths. Pike desperately tried to maintain control. He accused Elizabeth of fabricating evidence, claimed she was trying to distract from her own failures, demanded the tribunal ignore irrelevant accusations, and focus on her domestic worthiness. Elizabeth calmly responded by producing official correspondence, letters between Pike and his criminal associates, payment records for human cargo, documentation of bribes paid to territorial officials who looked the other way. Martha corroborated every piece of evidence, explained how her husband had gathered the information before his death, revealed that he'd been planning to expose Pike's crimes when illness claimed him first. The crowd turned hostile toward Pike. Voices demanded justice for missing family members. Questions flew about stolen town funds and corrupted legal proceedings. His authority collapsed like a house built on sand. Elizabeth's final stroke was a formal petition to territorial authorities. She'd already sent copies of all evidence to the capital. Federal investigators were en route to examine Pike's operations. His courthouse would soon face real legal scrutiny. Pike's arrest came swift and decisive. Territorial marshals had been waiting outside throughout the proceedings. They entered on Elizabeth's signal and took him into custody for human trafficking, embezzlement, and abuse of judicial authority. The townspeople watched their corrupt leader led away in shackles. The same chains he'd used to bind others now held him. Justice had arrived through the intelligence and courage of someone he dismissed as worthless. Elizabeth's legal victory extended beyond personal freedom. Pike's criminal network collapsed under federal investigation. Stolen funds were recovered for the community. Missing women's families finally learned their loved ones' fates. Martha emerged as a community leader in Pike's absence. Her courage in exposing his crimes earned widespread respect. She used her late husband's business knowledge to help establish legitimate governance and honest commerce. Elizabeth and Gideon chose to remain married by genuine affection rather than legal compulsion. Their partnership had evolved into something deeper than either had imagined possible, something built on mutual respect and shared values. Their farm became a sanctuary for other victims of Pike's system, former slaves seeking education, families displaced by corruption, anyone who needed a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity and hope. Elizabeth established a school in the renovated courthouse. She taught reading, writing, and legal rights to anyone willing to learn. Knowledge became the foundation for lasting freedom and justice. The woman who'd once stood in chains now held the power to break others' bonds through education and opportunity. Her story proved that human worth couldn't be measured by circumstances or appearance. Justice had triumphed through intelligence, courage, and community action. The corrupt system had fallen, not to violence, but to truth exposed by someone who refused to accept the fate others had written for her. Now that's what I call a story that sticks with you, ain't it? Hope you all love it. So, what do you think? And as we wrap up this episode of Saddle and Sixgun, don't forget to leave a comment down below and tell us where you're watching from. And of course, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the Wild West. We've had a heap of fun spinning this yarn for you, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. So, click the video that just popped up on the end screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow, partners.